Hello and welcome to Michigan Planning Today. I'm Bob Gibbs, your host, and we are delighted today to have Chris Long on as one of our guest speakers. Chris, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Again, name is Chris Long. The architectural firm is Longe AIA. I've been practicing in Birmingham for about 35 years. And through the course of 35 years, most of my work has been done in Birmingham. Did make a choice a long time ago to try to build the city. Do work outside the state, certainly, and outside our local region, but predominantly in Birmingham, Bloomfield Hills.
And are you an architect that specializes in any one type of building?
I do not specialize. Again, I made a choice a long time ago not to specialize, not to actually hone a style or an aesthetic that kind of bores me. I enjoy doing different things, different typologies, different projects. As a career gets longer, you know, I get more intrigued by things that are more complex and larger in scale. So that's kind of where the career has gone. My career has gone.
It was interesting looking at the projects that you've designed and have had built, and they range everything from small homes to large, complex buildings. How did you get interested in becoming an architect? You
know, I took a drafting class in high school at I think 6th or 7th grade, and about from 6th or 7th grade on, I knew I was going to be an architect. There was no deviation.
Yeah, same with me. I took a drafting class in 7th grade, which I tried to get out of. It ended up being a career-changing class for me. Where'd you go to school? What's your background?
College was Lawrence Tech, LTU now. So got the first degree there and the graduate degree after that.
Did you start your office right out of school?
Predominantly out of school. There were two folks that I knew of and happened to just actually almost at this intersection, Birmingham and Maple and Woodward, and we crossed paths, and I was heading somewhere else and started to work for them on a part-time basis, and that became a partnership which lasted for about 3 years, I think, 2 or 3 years. So basically out of school.
So looking at the image on the screen, it's the intersection of Woodward Avenue, Old Woodward, and Maple in downtown Birmingham, Michigan. And there's a landmark building on the southeast corner. Can you tell us about your role in that building?
That is the, as you say, the corner of Woodward and Maple City Center. The building that, right at the very corner, was originally a 2-story building. It was actually truncated during, I think, the Depression. It was designed, the steel foundations were designed to be, I think, a 5-story building. And the building directly to the south of it, the taller building, if you look at the picture, that was a surface parking lot that had an entrance off of Woodward and on Peabody. So the owner, who happens to own a significant portion of the downtown of Birmingham, decided to expand, develop his properties. So we did the 5-story building, as you see to the south, which it's a mixed-use building. It has 2 apartments on the top, offices underneath, and then, of course, the retail, where Universal Watch is on the 1st floor. The building to the north, which is called the Briggs Building, which is the one that was historically designated, we added a 2nd or a 3rd floor, I should say, to it. So the 2 buildings together were built together.
So you added a 3rd story to a 2-story building?
Correct.
How do you do that? Do you have to move everybody out? And
we did. We did. The thing about that was unique. The thing that was unique about that condition was that the offices on the 2nd floor were largely smaller offices, so it was kind of easy to displace them one by one. The difficult thing about adding on to the building, as you might imagine, was we wanted the 2 buildings to line up so their floors lined up, so you could actually, you know, they became one large footprint. The steel in the building the Briggs building was riveted.
Oh.
So that caused some heartburn, some issues to deal with, but we managed to pull it off.
And it's a really beautiful addition. It's there's limestone on the corner, and then there's some sort of gray metal on the rest. What is that?
That's actually zinc.
Oh, zinc, real zinc?
Real zinc, pre-weathered zinc.
Pre-weathered. It's really a beautiful addition. And then the first floor is black with arches. Was that original to the building?
No, the arched storefront there, where Lululemon is, that was originally a bank building. I think Birmingham Bloomfield Bank was there. And it's had obviously many inhabitants, but Lululemon is the one who chose to paint it black.
Yeah. I'm going to switch the slide and to some of the homes that you've designed. Can tell us about your approach when you design a home? And there seems to be kind of a Chris Long signature. I can almost identify some homes. They seem to have a, I don't know what the shingle style, traditional character about them.
Yeah, I mean, this particular house, that's a rendering, obviously. That is definitely a shingle style home. It's on a lake. But the approach is, I would think any architect would have, is the views, the light, you know, the site itself. And as far as the shingle style goes, it's something I gravitate to. It is not something I rely on necessarily. I used to do pride myself on saying I don't repeat myself more than twice. I've probably repeated, you know, a shingle style aesthetic more than twice.
And what is shingle style? What does that mean?
Shingle style, I think that's probably the only true American style aesthetic, I should say. It was a style that was pretty much said that you can place windows and doors abstractly in an overarching gable, in this case, to organize different elements within the body of the house. And it was a very popular style at the turn of the century, and the principle still.
I noticed that this is a large, obviously a very large home, but it's not designed to look large. It's almost designed to look like it's smaller than it actually is, which I know pre-war a lot of homeowners, wealthy homeowners, were modest and they wanted their homes to look underscaled, and it seems like you've accomplished that here.
Yeah, designing large homes is not an easy thing because you have to break it down, and then, you know, architects less able can't really break a house down and make it look still as a cohesive design. But you know, it's definitely a challenge compared to a small house, which is pretty easy to manipulate. And we've noticed that a lot of small homes today are designed to look big. And the big homes are designed to look bigger. Tell me about this beautiful house. That's an interesting house. I think in my case, I was a little bored with everything I was doing at the time, so I kind of threw a lot of things at this particular house and tried to make them blend. So it's definitely a shingle style home, obviously by the shingles on it. It is on a golf course, and it's on a curve, so it's not orthogonal, and as in the garage, not perpendicular to the body of the house. But there's also an apartment above the garage that's connected to the house for an aging father that moved in. So, interesting house.
I've noticed that the shingle style is a popular style almost across the whole U.S., that it's accepted in California or the Southeast or the Midwest, and it's a very comfortable style.
It is. It's fun to play with as an architect.
Okay, here's another home. Chris, tell us about this one.
Also kind of a unique home. Again, I don't think it's shingle style per se. Certainly borrows some of the characteristics of a shingle style home, but you know, the large stone arch at the front and broad porch on the front, which you really can't see. You can see by the voids, the shade, the shadow of the front. But it is, again, a large house on a deep but narrow lot. And again, taking into consideration the light and the context of the neighborhood, actually, too. I mean, that's a very important thing. I don't, many homes, and it's fine, architects want to stand out with their adjacent neighbors. I tend to like working on infill buildings or homes just because I'd like to borrow from the neighbors in the neighborhood and kind of mash it together and hopefully come up with a successful
How do you get your
design.
inspiration for designing such a beautiful place? Where do you get your ideas from?
I luckily have a big appetite for reading, and I don't have the time to travel necessarily, but I do have a fairly good understanding of what's going on where and what it looks like and the elements that go with those things.
Do you try to make the homes feel like they fit into the community in which they're located? Do you get inspiration from that?
Absolutely. I mean, the Bigfoot rage years ago, there were many people that railed obviously against it. I was probably one of the Bigfoot guys back then, but I was never accused of it. And I think that comes as a result of trying to blend in. I mean, you can have a big house next to a modest house and still be respectful of that home, and that's what I endeavor to do. I don't really want to stand out.
What do you mean by the Bigfoot craze? What is that?
You know, when somebody buys a lot, or a developer or a builder or a homeowner buys a lot and then endeavors to take the house down, the house that was on the lot, and then build something of the century, for example. It tends to have taller ceilings, more glass, taller in general, steeper pitches on the roof. And those elements are pretty consistent, I think, with homes that you see, new homes today. Well, I do the same thing, but I try to, again, blend in with the adjacent neighbors, not overpower them.
It's a good thing to do for community planning. So you also design multifamily homes. I don't like that term, multifamily, but let's call these multifamily homes. Tell me about this landmark complex.
Landmark? Brown Hill, that was the code name for it, Brown Hill. Brown Street was rezoned many years ago to be an R8 property or a townhouse property. And I've done now about, I think, 15 almost 15. There's a block of 8 that have yet to be completed. But the idea behind these is to create a walk-up, a brownstone, and frame the street. And that's what I was attempting to do with this. You want to actually crowd the front setback as best you can, and make that experience as you walk by these kind of a cool thing. It's almost like a New York or Chicago downtown.
What do you mean you want to crowd the street? That doesn't sound very pedestrian friendly.
Yeah, it is. It is. I think if you were to walk past this, you would not feel crowded. Walking down the sidewalks. It's an actual experience. I mean, there's landscaping. There's architectural elements of the building that are kind of interesting to look at.
You'll want to address the street and bring the building up to the edge of the street.
I do. I don't think that a big front yard would serve a purpose for trying to get, multiple houses on one site.
Where are these located?
These are on Brown Street.
In Birmingham?
In Birmingham, correct.
Okay, great. And I don't see the garages. The garages aren't in the front. Where are the garages at, Chris?
It's intentionally.
Oh.
The garages are underground, and you come in the side of the building and turn around on the back, and the whole house is serviced at the lowest level. So everything is, there's stairways obviously, but there's also elevators in each of these.
Why do you like to put the garages in the back when you're building in cities?
Garages serve no purpose other than to house a car. They are not pedestrian friendly. They're not great things to look at, specifically when they're open. Not friendly.
Yeah. So, in doing research on your experience, I noticed that almost every landmark building in Birmingham has your name on it. Not everyone. There's a lot of great architects in Birmingham, but a lot of them. This is a really wonderful building on Pierce Street in downtown Birmingham across from the City Hall. And can you tell us about the design philosophy behind this building and why it looks like this?
I probably can't take credit for the style. The owner of the building favors traditional architecture, and he wanted something of stone, he wanted something traditional, and gave me a couple of pictures that he had of things he had seen in Europe, and from that I kind of composed this. And he does live on the top. That is an actual suite up top.
Really?
Yep. You see the balcony.
The owner lives in the building. Wow,
Owner
that's
lives in the
nice.
building, right? Owner-occupied building. So he occupies the third floor. There's a large terrace. You can kind of see the fireplaces and the railing. So the second floor is office, and the first floor is office retail.
And what's the building made out of?
It is entirely made out of limestone and steel windows.
And steel windows, yeah. And does this have a historical name, a style?
It does not.
No? It's a collection of several?
Yeah, it's definitely it's an interesting building.
It's really beautiful.
It's my style, I guess you could call it.
Okay. And here's another signature building in downtown Birmingham. This is on Martin Street, I think, across from Shane Park downtown, right?
Correct. 250 Martin is the name, right?
And tell me about this building.
This building, if you've been around long enough, you probably remember it in its first incarnation, which was a precast building that fell into bankruptcy. It was bought out of bankruptcy by my client, who wanted to live on the top of the building. I mean, he bought it for the sole purpose of living there. So we started to rearrange the upper level, punch some windows in, and literally the first window we started to work on, it was clear that there were some issues with the actual construction of the building. So ultimately what happened is, it was an existing building. Ultimately what happened is every brick, precast, window, door, everything went in the dumpster, and it was repurposed, reimagined. So again, I took what was a fairly, it was a nice building to start with, but a all-white building, and chose to make it look, blend in. So it has a little bit of the library, it has a little bit of the city hall in it, and it again tries to be a good neighbor.
Yeah, it's located next to the library and city hall and the old post office.
Correct.
So the materials are made out of brick and stone?
Limestone, yeah.
Is that real limestone? Do you use real limestone?
Yep.
And then what's on the first floor here?
First floor is a real estate broker.
And why have commercial on the first floor? Why not just have one more condominium on the ground level?
That's a good question. I know that the ordinance doesn't allow that. But aside from that, from a planning perspective, maybe you could enlighten me on why that maybe is or not a good idea.
Yeah, we wouldn't have a lot of privacy
Privacy would
maybe
be
on the
certainly
first
the issue.
level, and it's nice to have businesses on the first level for walkability.
Activity,
Yeah.
right.
And I don't see any parking garages, any garages here. Where do the people park?
Same thing. We were lucky to have an alley that is on the backside, and you come in off the alley and again descend into a one level below grade parking structure underground.
I think one of the noteworthy things about the building is that it's a 5-story building, but you've designed it to look like a 4-story building.
Correct.
The upper level is in a gable. Was that intentional, to make the building look a little shorter than it is?
Completely. I mean, that's what the 2016 overlay plan was designed to do, Duane's plan, which was to keep things looking like a 4-story building. So, for example, if you stand across the building from the park, you can certainly see the top floor, but walking along the street, or the sidewalk, I should say, it still appears to be a 4-story building.
And the 2016 plan is the master plan the city
plan.
adopted in 1996.
Correct.
Designed by Andreas Duane,
Correct.
the noted Miami architect. And I think he wanted, I remember during that plan, the city, I think, only allowed 2-story buildings.
Correct.
And the real estate community said they needed 4 and 5-story buildings to make it work.
And also, there was a floor area ratio
okay.
that was dispensed with.
So this building is across the street from Shane Park, and I understand you've had a little influence on Shane Park too. Can you tell us about Shane Park and your experience?
Sure. Actually, this is shot from the building we just were looking at. Shane Park was, this iteration of Shane Park anyway, was a collaboration with Ron Ray.
Who's Ron Ray?
Ron Ray is a designer in town who's done a vast amount of work as well, mostly restaurants, but certainly houses and other things. He was definitely driven to deliver a park to the city. The first iteration of that park wound up with an underground parking component and all kinds of things that cost a lot of money. And because of and a bond was actually passed to support that. The construction costs, however, were in excess of the bond amount. So we revisited the park about a year later and wound up providing additional parking around the site, and also created Martin as a two-way street as opposed to a single parallel parked street. And it was a sketch in Dewani's 2016 plan, but we gave it reality.
Right, Andreas Dewani's team did the sketch for this in the 1996 plan, and then it was implemented by the city. It's a beautiful park. My office is across the street from the park, and it's used all the time. It's one of the it's where you see people taking pictures. And what I find interesting is that originally this park were homes. And in the 1920s, the city hired a Harvard landscape architect in the 1920s, and he said you should buy 6 blocks of houses and tear them down and build the city hall, the library, and he did a civic plan. And part of it was this, the community house, the post office was part of the plan. The city had a lot of foresight to do that. Tell me about the building here on Woodward.
Again, that's the building that's directly adjacent to the building we opened with, the historic building. This building, again, it sits in a place that was a surface parking lot. The developer wanted to put a 5-story building to maximize and leverage his property. So the way I viewed it is much larger than what you're seeing right here. It was a large surface parking lot. So it had an entrance from Woodward and on Peabody. So we built the building. As you see it, it's got 2 residential units on top. But the back side of this building, we put in a 3-story parking deck. And if anybody's experienced the building, the Clark Hill canopy at the front is actually it's not a storefront, it's open, it's a thoroughfare. And we created sort of a via that takes you back and is a connection between Maple, Cafe Via, and now Pernod is there, and it takes you back to
and
Via
Street. Is the pedestrian walkway in a city.
And that was all intentional.
This also was built out of the 1996 Dewani plan, the city plan, which is a 5-story building designed to look 4. And what about this one, Chris?
That is the old Jacobson's building, if anybody remembers that.
The old department store.
The old department store, right. And the idea was to make it, initially the idea was to, as he did, he bought it to make it a retail, first floor retail, and maybe some office above. And the building that he bought was kind of, if anybody remembers it, it was pretty bad. He wanted to punch a few holes in it.
Let's say pretty plain.
Yeah, it's pretty plain. Punch holes in it, some doors, some windows. I had personally different ideas on it, and I wanted to make it a kind of a gateway building, and then it wasn't going to get torn down, so I had to deal with what was there. So we added the corner piece, which is where the original Jacobson's entry was, but celebrated that whole corner and created an outdoor space on the second floor that you can see with the trees.
And this is much more modern than a lot of your buildings.
Yeah, I'm a closet modernist to start with.
And this is a building under construction.
Yes, Brookside.
Tell me about Brookside.
Brookside, the original site, if anybody is aware or familiar with it, it had, I think, 12 little townhomes on it, and it sits on the precipice of overlooking the river in Booth Park to the north. And I had the good fortune to have a client that somehow obtained all those individual units, and then said, what do you want to do with it? And to me. So it was originally zoned, I think, only as a 2 or 3-story zone, but it made a whole lot of sense to go up taller for reasons that slide kind of hints at, the parking deck to the south and what we used to call the Google building further to the south. So the thought was to take advantage of I think it drops from the front door to the river 50 feet. So what is underneath the building is 2 floors of parking. So we have roughly 80 spaces,
Gee.
70 spaces, 80 spaces in the basement, and a component that is common to all units for their use, which is a community room and an exercise room on the river. So it is a mixed-use building.
Yeah.
It's got 26 units, and the first floor is retail.
And this was designed to be more modern?
This was definitely designed to be more modern.
Yeah, it's a great site next to Booth Park in downtown Birmingham. And you have West Brown. This is a project that's under construction right now, also in Birmingham.
Correct, on Brown Street.
What's this going to be?
All individual townhomes. Kind of fun only because the challenge of creating 8 individual units that look a little bit different, yet still have a thread of continuity between them, was challenging, or is challenging, but fun at the same time. So the thought here was to, again, same principle, get it to the sidewalk, to the street, create that wall for the pedestrian to
And
experience.
the parking is in the back.
Same thing, the parking is in the back.
And this is another building built out of brick and stone?
Stone.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Birmingham has been fortunate to have a lot of really great architects during the last decades, and you're one of them.
Thank you.
And can you tell us, how do you get such great projects and great clients? It's a competitive business, isn't it?
It is a competitive business, and I don't really know. Frankly, I've been lucky. Just lucky. I think being around a lot helps. Listening to your client helps. Trying to be a good neighbor to, whether it's a residence or a downtown building, urban infill building, trying to be a good neighbor to the adjacent properties, thinking through a project so that you can defend it. Aesthetically, it's got to be, from my perspective, it has to be second to none. I hope that's the case in some of these buildings. And then,
But you seem to always build quality and design quality buildings.
yep,
Is architecture a rewarding career?
not so much financially.
No?
It's rewarding from a. For me personally, again, I get to walk through a town that I've contributed a lot to. So I walk through the Via every day to go get my Starbucks and get to experience my building. It's all in the background these days, but it's very nice when you sit back and take stock.
Do you
of
do
your career.
any commissions outside of Birmingham?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Where else have you worked?
I have a house right now going in Miami on the Intercoastal. Had a house up in Jacksonville. Have done some things on the East Coast in Wawinet, Nantucket. But largely it's Birmingham, Bloomfield Hills.
Okay. Chris, thank you very much for joining us on our show today. And thank you for joining Michigan Planning Today. We look forward to seeing you next time.